Lauren, I want to ask you about China using these overseas trips by Lai Ching-te and the statements that President Lai Ching-te makes as an excuse to conduct military exercises. Is this a new normal?
So I think anytime that President Lai goes overseas or makes statements that somehow suggest that Taiwan is a sovereign or independent entity and that the option of unification is not on the table, China has to react to that. For them, Taiwan and that goal of reunification is such a political crown jewel that they can't let this go by without doing something. And so the joint sword exercise series, because we don't know how many letters are in the alphabet for them to execute, right? Like they could use a joint sword in response to any type of engagement or speech or travel as they deem appropriate. So my hope is that because, I think from the road, President Lai has shown a pretty pragmatic and even-handed approach from what I've seen. So hopefully any military response by China would also take into account the fact that, there haven't been any splashy statements about Taiwan's identity that he's made. And hopefully China will be savvy enough to calibrate in that context.
With China having conducted Joint Sword A, Joint Sword B, and now potentially a Joint Sword C, is there a concern that maybe the United States and Taiwan could maybe be complacent that these drills are becoming kind of an ordinary kind of occurrence?
I do worry about that. I think that, if you look at the history of air and maritime entry events into Taiwan's ADIZ as sort of our historical marker, when those started at a larger scale and frequency than what we had seen, it was a big shock, I think, to the United States. And the United States responded, right? There were statements, there were cautionary words put out into the public. But with time, my view is that some of that tapered off. And the US, in some ways, effectively helped normalize those actions China was taking toward Taiwan. And so now I think with the joint sword exercises continuing, indefinitely, we're confronted with the same challenge, right? Do we want to push back every time they happen? And if so, how hard should the United States push back? Or do we run the risk of normalizing them by not doing anything? And I think that would be particularly dangerous. So it will be important and interesting to watch, in the coming days, how the US and potentially allies and partners around the world also respond.